Welcome to Live with Pastor Brian. And of course, I'm Pastor Brian Foreman, and I have with me Eric Brookins. Hello, Eric. Glad that you are with us. Why don't we start out by telling people how we know each other? How do you know?
So we know each other from Palm Beach. Now it's called Palm Beach Atlantic
Right,
University. It was just
right.
Palm
Much
Beach
more
Atlantic
impressive.
College. Yeah, after we left, they upgraded it. And they still say go fish, though, so I was proud of that. And you were a student that studied at PBA, and I was a student who went there. That's how we know each other.
Yes, yes. And you had classes with Sue Ellen, you mentioned when we were talking.
I did. I was the irreverent one in class, and she was the studious one once again.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I was an education major and a biology major, so we had education classes together. So
Okay,
that was
very good.
how we knew each
Very
other.
good. Yeah, and we didn't hang out that much. I really don't think I was cool enough to hang out with you, to be quite honest.
Yeah. So I think we had mutual friends
Yes.
because they were in classes with me, but I don't know that you were ever in any of my classes.
Yeah, I don't think
Um,
so. And I think you were
but
a
you were
year
doing
or
it.
so ahead of me as well. But
Yeah. What year did you graduate?
91.
Yep. Yep. I was 1 year ahead. So yeah. Yeah. And I was actually only there 3 years. So um, you would have only seen me two.
I see. Okay. So I have, with the invention of Facebook, everybody kind of caught up with a lot of their old classmates. And so I've been watching you from a distance on Facebook. And now, what are you doing?
So I pastor a church here in Cocoa, Florida.
Now, where is Cocoa, Florida, for people who don't know?
If you drive from Disney World in Orlando east, you will, after an hour, run into the coast. It's
Okay.
where they launch rockets from. So we actually have stopped church for a minute or two, gone outside, watched a rocket launch, and then come back into church. I don't know what else to do about it. It shakes the building, so we have done that.
Right. Okay. Very good. And so now you are pastoring. And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you right now is you have the interesting perspective of pastoring during this time, as well as being married to a doctor.
Yes, an amazing doctor too. She is uh, amazing, absolutely amazing. I'll be honest with you, and it's not just me that says that. Other people say that, including the CEO that recognized her just a couple weeks ago. So
Awesome. So
all the things she does.
what does she do as a doctor? What's her name and what's her specialty? What's she do?
So her name is Kristen, and she is a hospitalist at Advent Health here in Orlando, a Christian-based hospital. So that's nice too. She can actually share and pray with patients, which she does, and so she has that unique perspective. A hospitalist, also sometimes called an internist, which I thought meant she was an intern. That's a long story, but church world, we have interns. But a hospitalist, basically, when you go to the hospital now, you have a doctor for you at the hospital. And so she will take on maybe up to 20, sometimes more, sometimes less, patients that when she's on, they're kind of under her, they get admitted to the hospital. She
Hmm.
takes care of all their medicines, updates their surgeons, all that kind of stuff. So
Okay. So my big questions are, what have you learned during this lockdown, during COVID, being married to a doctor, as well as being a pastor in this time, and how those two possibly unique perspectives have been blended in your life? So you can answer that however you like.
you should never let me loose like that. So my first, we heard on the news about COVID. Now, here's what's funny. My wife does not watch the news. She typically has no idea what's going on. I'm like her morning report. So if I see that something's important for her to know, I actually will, in the morning, bring her coffee and tell her, here's what's happening, things you need to know about. But she came home one day and she looked at me and she said, you aren't going to the gym anymore. Well, I had been getting up at 4:20 every morning, going to the gym. I'd be there before 5 o'clock and work out in the morning. It's my routine for years. She says, you're not going to the gym anymore, which was like, what? And I told her they wipe down all the equipment. I talked about I wipe it down before I get on. Oh, she said, no, no, no. I just had a patient come in who did all of that, and she named the health club and said, and now there's an outbreak from that health club in this area. We believe because of working out and the basically the droplets in the air. It's not the virus, it's the virus attached to the droplets. I had no idea about any of that. So of course I did well, but yeah. And she said, you can get an elliptical and do it at home.
So
yeah.
That's why you have the exercise robot in the background. That's what
we have the exercise robot in the background. And even my son is wanting to go back to the gym because he loves to play basketball. And in Florida, the gyms are already open. YMCA is open. And we've kind of said, you need to wait just a little bit longer here for us to see what's happening. So that was a unique perspective that a lot of people didn't have, because she actually has worked on the COVID floor. She knows how people, a lot of times she can figure out kind of where they're at, not necessarily, but if they get several patients. And of course, nursing homes are the most difficult because it goes patient to patient so easily, and they're so critical. The good news is many of the cases in Florida have been very mild. We have, I believe, I don't want to exaggerate because I am a pastor and numbers typically aren't good, but I think we have 4 or 5 people in our church that have had COVID, all mild cases. And a friend of mine in Brevard, he and his wife, who is a pastor, both had COVID. And they actually got it, they think, in a church service right before they shut everything down. So
one of the challenges that you and I talked about was that there has been so much conflicting information, probably in part because it is a new disease and there was new information coming out at all time. But I think that's one of the reasons why it's been so challenging for everyone is, you hear one thing and then you hear something else, and it's hard to know what is going on. So what perspective would you bring to that, and how have you navigated that? For example, we talked about masks that, early on the CDC was saying, not a big deal, it seemed like, and then it became a big deal, and now it's become a very divisive issue. So what have you learned, and how have you navigated all of that?
Well, so I think, this is the conversation early on with my wife, because very early on is when they were saying it was only transmitted by surfaces. And even then my wife said, don't wear gloves, just wash your hands and that kind of thing. We started wearing masks into the grocery store before anybody else was here, which was awkward. The only thing I knew to do is when people looked at me funny, I would cough. I didn't know what else to do. It just made me feel better. It's very vain, but it still works, by the way. They do move back when you cough just a little. But so, Kristen basically, as we talked, said, Eric, I wear masks, a surgical mask especially, all day, all the time. There's times, and anytime I think I have a cold. Her hospital, anytime someone did not have the flu shot or could not have the flu shot, they would have to wear a mask. And the reason why was so they wouldn't accidentally cough, or even if they were talking and have droplets of virus go in the air. And so there's been more and more studies of that. There's been some misinformation about masks and CO2, and that's really kind of a funny thing, because if it really was hurting doctors, that would have already been fixed. If a surgical mask was making your surgeon pass out or lose consciousness, that would be a problem. Now,
especially during surgery.
Yeah, if you're in the middle of brain surgery and you pass out, or you're losing brain cells every day, your surgeon would get dumber and dumber. And doctors would have addressed that years ago. I mean, they've been wearing surgical masks, I think, since the Civil War. I'm not sure. I want to say that's when we first started learning about things. We don't want to do things like we did back then. So anyway, but I realized that when people are scared, they're always looking for black and white, easy answers, and those answers aren't always easy. We have told people in our church if they can't wear a mask, because sometimes if you've got a breathing problem, maybe you have COPD, and I'm also aware some people are just claustrophobic. Like I am afraid of heights, they're afraid of things. So we've kind of said, hey, we encourage wearing a mask, because we realize the more people that wear a mask, the less chance of them coughing it on somebody. There's still a chance. If you're close proximity with somebody, you still could give it to them, but it just knocks the chances down.
Yeah.
A
One of the
little.
things that I've heard is that masks are unnecessary because they don't keep the virus from getting to you. And I think that's one of the things that our conversation kind of pointed out and reminded me of, is that it's in essence so that you don't share anything with anyone else, because that's part of the challenge of this disease, is that you can be asymptomatic. You can have it, spread it, and never know that you had it. And just like when a doctor wears one in a surgery, it's not to protect them from anything that the patient might have, it's to protect the patient from anything that the doctor might have. So it's much more about keeping your germs to yourself. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, they do think it does have some effect the other way also, but yes, the
Mhm.
primary is that way. And even from the very beginning, the World Health Organization, which initially discouraged masks just because of supply, not because of a medical reason,
Mm.
they actually will say that. If you read into their articles, they'll say masks not necessary. And then as you read their articles, they say, except for people with COVID. What? So we've had 5 or 6 people, I think, at our church. I know one very specifically. I heard her whole story. She only got tested because somebody said, why don't you go get tested? She had no fever, no cough, no symptoms, and went and got tested and had to stay home several weeks, and then finally tested negative.
Mm.
And so, yeah, and I would say most of the people that are in our church, one person had symptoms, and then they tested the rest of the family, and several people in the family had it. So I
Mhm.
think the same thing happened with the NBA months ago, where they tested a whole bunch of people, but only one actually had symptoms. So yes, that's true.
Mm. So that kind of transitions nicely to the second half of the equation, which is, we have people all over the map on their take on that, on social distancing, on the necessity of the lockdown. Some people are really scared, which you brought out, and that can really affect the way some people act. So how have you navigated all of that from a pastoral perspective?
So, we've tried to, well, number one, I've tried to realize that people come from all different places. I mean, we have people who, like you said, they don't want to, social distance. They want to hug everybody. So we've tried to say, hey, even if it's just for other people, maybe, hold back for now. The other thing we've done is we've done a drive-in service, which has been great. We're actually continuing that, even though we have an in-person service. We actually now have 2, because we just broadcast our 2 services on the radio. Plus we do the online. So people get options, and I try to never guilt. If somebody writes me and says, Eric, I'm so sorry, we just don't feel comfortable coming yet, I tell them that's great. Then don't come, watch, encourage.
Mhm.
And so that's been a good thing. We've also done a couple of things where some of our senior adults, we've gone and dropped off things at their house just to make them feel a little connected. I've tried to catch up. I especially have paid attention to some of our older folks, and tried to call them and kind of check on them, or even text them. I have a few, like my mother, even in her mid-80s, is very good at texting. She likes texting better. So, which is funny because most
Right,
people her age don't like it at all. So,
right.
but I've even had, Zoom, quite a few older folks on Zoom where we've done Zoom Bible studies. And so that's been
Yeah.
great too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things. Well, you mentioned how it first came on your radar screen. The first time that anybody had any kind of conversation with me, I was visiting one of our older congregants, and the people in our church will probably be able to guess who it was. And she basically said, I don't, and this wasn't even on my radar screen at the time. She said, I don't know if I'll be coming to church, because if I catch this, I'm pretty much going to die.
Oh
you
my
know
goodness.
and because she has underlying conditions, she has health concerns, she has I don't know if it's COPD, but definitely breathing issues, because of her age and all that. And if you plug it into the calculator, it's grim.
Yeah.
uh, so I that was how I first was introduced to it, was somebody telling me I'm not going to be at church because I could die.
Yeah. So now, did you do like I did and kind of go home and start looking stuff up once you kind of?
Yes. In fact, are you familiar with the Enneagram? Have you heard of that?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm a number 5, and a 5, their nickname is the investigator. So that means if I go see a movie about, something that's loosely based on history, I go home and I research it and I become an expert on that. Way back when the Titanic came out, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I just spent the next 3 months just in my leisure time researching all about the Titanic. So
And
yes.
there's a guy in that movie that was on the Titanic and survived.
Oh, really? I did not know
Did you
that.
know that?
I did not know that.
I won't tell you how he survived because Baptists, we don't like it. But
Oh, right.
He made his own antifreeze because I said to my wife, I said, could that be true? She goes, oh yeah. Yeah, it's like antifreeze. So there you go. That's what you wanted on this. That's what you wanted on this Zoom call, right?
That's the content I was aiming for. Exactly. Yeah. So yes. So that's what I did, is basically from the beginning. That conversation was probably in the first week of March. And then as it became more and more prevalent in the news, I started digging deep and researching. And by that Saturday, I was calling our team together and saying, I think we might need to do something. And then, so we were, everything started happening very quickly, but we had decided not to meet that first week before the governor said anything, before a lot of churches were making that decision. But everything happened so quickly, so it's not like we were especially prescient or anything.
Yeah, but it's hard. It's hard to be first. It's hard to be first to say.
Yeah,
I don't think
we weren't the first, but it was early and everything was happening. But yes, I'm a researcher, so I go deep and I try to read, and I think that's again one of the frustrations and challenges that we've faced, is you hear so many conflicting messages, and everybody has an agenda. So it's really hard to sort out what's reliable and dependable and make a good decision, but everybody's doing their best.
Yeah,
so what about you?
Oh, go ahead. So
I was just, if you had something to say, go ahead. But I was just going to say
they just caught some researchers that had turned in false research that was actually published by the World Health Organization.
Yeah.
And they didn't even have a science background. I don't know if you saw any of that. It's crazy stuff. And we've never it's because everybody has a platform now.
Right.
And so somebody, if they make it outrageous enough, everybody's going to go, yeah, that's what it is. It's a trick. So anyway.
Yeah. So just to wrap up, what about you personally? What have been the personal lessons that you, as a follower of Jesus and as a pastor, navigating through this? What have you learned? Or what do you feel like the Lord is teaching you? Maybe you haven't learned it yet.
Well, it's funny because I realize how diverse. I did a survey before we went back to in-person meetings. A friend of mine had sent out a survey, and I kind of had heard some things about masks and how people felt, and then whether people would feel. So I put some questions in that survey, and it really caused me to realize how diverse our church really is, politically, with what they believe and who they believe. And so for me, I want to be the person who can look at people no matter where they're coming from and help them. I never want to chase anybody away from Christ because of something that's less important. Absolutely. And, a virus might send somebody to their grave, but I realize that I have the opportunity to help somebody find their way home to heaven. And so, as important as what everybody does is, if we can keep the bigger perspective that in this, we want to help these people. So I don't want to chase anybody off because they don't believe what I believe about a medical issue that truthfully, I'm not trained in. And so, in theology, I know who God is. And I, of course, have had many personal testimonies about Christ. And so I'm trying to keep the focus there, even while trying to keep people safe. Now, the good news is I expected like half the people to wear masks last week when we went back to church. everybody wore a mask. I was actually surprised. And I actually wear mine until I get on the stage, and then I take it off. But it's been a very, as much as I thought people would. The other thing I learned is we have so many people that are full of grace, and so I had one lady who said, "You know what? I'm not coming into service," and I said, "Oh, you can come into service." She goes, "No, I don't want to wear a mask. I'm claustrophobic, but I also don't want to make other people feel uncomfortable. So I'm going to listen in the parking lot." And I
Mm.
thought, that's so gracious. She cared more about other people than sitting in the building with us. So it's just neat to see people, and it just encourages me as a pastor. So I don't know if that's what you were asking, but I went there anyway.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer. Thank you so much for doing this. I think it's been really helpful and encouraging, and it's been great to talk to you. And if people wanted to follow you, be in touch with you, what's the best way to keep up with you?
Well, I mean, I have a Facebook page, Eric Brookins, Erick. I also have a YouTube channel, which is ADD Pastor. I don't know if you knew that. I actually got that.
I think I did know that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty sad. Somebody said, "Why do you
Well.
have ad pastor?" But and as you noticed during this conversation, when I was in seminary, actually, when I learned that I had ADD, I wasn't aware of it until one of my friends said, "No, you need to go get checked out." So
Very good. Well, thanks again. And so follow Eric on Facebook and YouTube, and we'll look forward to being in touch again. Thanks again.